If there's one thing I love most about video games is the visuals and the storytelling. So you can imagine that I adore Little Nightmares. Its aesthetic is so striking and the feel of the game is so cinematic, I would dare to even call it interactive art rather than a video game platformer. If you clicked on this video, you probably know what Little Nightmares is, but with the release of the third game being a hot controversy in the community, at least at the moment of recording this video, I thought it would be cool to go back to the first game and see if it was really worth the hype. I'll put myself in the shoes of a new player without the knowledge that we have from the newer games. I want to go into this blind and see what the game's design shows us and how it builds the world of Little Nightmares without any other exterior media outside of this game specifically. Now, we have a lot to talk about, so let's not prolong this anymore and go straight to it. Right from the start, and I literally mean the main menu, the game gives you a glimpse into what to expect for when you first start a new game. A little kid wearing a yellow raincoat stands barefoot on a twisted and distorted staircase that leads to a slightly opened door. One little detail I love about this image is the chain that's in the top right corner of the screen. It's such a smart way to show that everything else in the world of Little Nightmares will be huge compared to the main character, and most people won't even notice it on their first playthrough. But let's press play. The game starts with a cutscene of a creepy lady humming something softly and turning her face towards the camera. Before we even get to see who she is, we wake up. Turns out it was just a little nightmare. Okay, I'll stop. We wake up as the little girl from the main menu, who now we know is named Six. And that's it. This is where the adventure begins. No big introduction, no tutorial, just go. Although later in the level or in slow moments here and there is a small pop-up telling which buttons correspond to what action, the game doesn't really have a UI. It's obviously not the first game in the history to do it, but the lack of a health bar or some dialogue or even small arrows pointing you into the right direction really adds to the atmosphere of this being more of a movie rather than a real game. Well, it's also true that Little Nightmares doesn't really need a tutorial, because the platformer elements are really bare bones here, and the games, in general, are really known for their amazing controls. Throughout the levels I have died a few times because I ran too far, or my characters went the wrong way. It's especially bad when the game gets a bit more three-dimensional, or expects the player to perfectly time out their movements. I can see how the same people responsible for Little Big Planet are behind this game, because Six controls very similarly to Sackboy. But hey, let's put all of that aside and get out of this place to somewhere better. After squeezing through some tunnels with only a lighter in hand, Six goes through a staircase with ginormous chains in the background. This not only mirrors the main menu, but it's the first time in the game we are shown the weird proportions in Little Nightmares. Some of the next rooms show it perfectly also. For example, one of the most iconic rooms from the first game. Two legs are dangling from the ceiling and swaying left to right a little. Interesting. Although depressing, this wouldn't be that crazy if some other things added up. But they don't. Why are his legs so long? Why is the furniture bending in different directions? And why is the chair so small compared to his body? And most importantly, why is it still up if he's hanging? Now, I might be looking too into this, but for me, this little example is why I adore this series and why it's so great at telling such intricate stories without any words and also being so intriguing and interesting. It's amazing, but we have to move forward. I have a feeling something is watching us. A little bit further in the level, while opening a fridge, a tiny creature pops out of it and immediately runs off screen. If we go after it and find it, Six can hug it. These are gnomes. For what we know now, they are just cute little creatures that might be the only things living here that don't try to kill us. They are also one of the 3 collectibles in the game. And while we're at the topic, I'll quickly go through them because they don't really offer that much. In the main game, there are 3 types of collectibles: gnomes, statues, and lights or candles. To collect gnomes, you have to rescue them or find them, after which they'll run away to a hidden location off screen. If you find them, then you can hug them, which will count as a collectible. These are definitely the most interesting in the game because they lead you to some secret rooms or maybe smaller puzzles. Now, the second collectibles are statues that you have to break. They are usually hidden in remote location or tricky sites. They are not that difficult to find, but sometimes you'll have to go on a little extra mission to go and find them. I mean, they are cute, but I much prefer the gnomes. And the third collectible is not really a collectible as much as a thing that you need to do if you want to get an achievement. In the darkness, there will be some lights or candles that Six can light up, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Even though it's not interesting at all, the visual of our lighter giving some warmth and light to this wet and cold and dark world is a really welcome addition and just a little side mission that you can do on your second playthrough. And okay, I have to be honest. I keep talking about the game in general because the prison level itself is easily one of the easiest and most forgettable chapters in the entire franchise. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still great and has its moments, but it's the only place without any overarching enemy that's a threat or any distinguishable theme really. We are introduced to two minor enemies, that being the leeches and the eye, both of which are pretty self-explanatory just by looking at them. And they aren't really a threat. Leeches are slow and the eye is predictable, but they play an important part of making sure the player is comfortable with the controls before going to the big leagues in the next chapters. What this chapter does great is introduce the first real enemy in the game, the janitor. We saw him earlier picking through a door and then moving a cage in the distance, but now he's right in our face and doesn't attack us. Huh. Weird. But we don't have the time to think about it, because Six's stomach begins to growl real hard, and her hunger becomes so unbearable she's barely walking. Thankfully, and conveniently, a single kid behind bars, sitting in what appears to be a cafeteria, throws us a last piece of his bread, without saying a word. We look at each other for a second, but there's no attempt to free him or help him or anything of that sort. Another really powerful visual from this chapter, which I really like. Once Six runs away, the kid is left alone, and he doesn't try to escape, he doesn't try to communicate, he just sits there in the cafeteria, waiting for something. Now, a fun fact that you might not know is in the early stages of development, the game's name was supposed to be Hunger instead of Little Nightmares, which guides us that this moment in the game is meant to be extremely important, so much so that it's named right from it in the beginning. In the end, I'm glad that the developers changed the name, because it opened up much more possibilities with sequels and spin-offs, and they don't have to involve Hunger at all. Six is the only character for now to showcase hunger in this way, and for the bigger storytelling of this game franchise, and what comes in later chapters, it would feel weird to have other kids experience the same thing as Six. It would make her less special. And if there's one thing Little Nightmares wants you to know is that Six is special. Now, this is where Little Nightmares really shines. The implications, the little details, the questions you have while playing the game. One detail that I love in this level, for example, is what happens when you push this crate. The devs could have easily left this space empty, or didn't have to add a sound effect in the end, but the addition of this optional little interaction immediately tells me that there is a bottom to this pit, and that it's gonna be a long way down, which makes this whole room 10 times scarier. But yeah, other than that, the prison chapter is just a slow introduction to what the game is really about, and it's with the second level that it's really starting to pick up the speed. The lair is the chapter where things start to get interesting. After snooping around some weird rooms, Six becomes hungry again. This time she eats some raw meat and gets put in a cage by... well, who exactly? For the first time in the franchise, the player has to face an actual full-blown enemy. We now know why the furniture in the other rooms was so warped and tall. It's not meant for us, it's meant for this fella. The janitor. And if you can tell, I love this little guy. This whole chapter is built around this one character and the many different ways he interacts with the environment. The janitor has tiny little legs, face covered in bandages, a small hat for his big head, and grotesquely long arms. This obviously poses some questions, and it's another example where I'll have to praise the world building and the storytelling of this game. Just by taking a look at him, you can have some questions already, and most of them are answered throughout this level. He uses his hands to walk and grab onto ledges. Because his eyes are covered, he can only hear you. Throughout the level, you can hear his breath being muffled because of the bandages. Being perceptive and focusing on the little details rewards the player, so we can better predict how an enemy will move and how to counter them and use their weaknesses against them. So for the janitor, for example, puzzles revolve around sound. Six walks on cloths and carpets as to not to make any noise and alert the janitor. So that's the perfect setup for parts of the level where there is no cloth. The only way through is by going on the squeaky wooden floor. It's moments like these that really build the tension. But the real nightmares come in the sections where you have to make a noise. And oh, trust, the janitor will hear it. These moments are really intensive and really make the first game memorable in my opinion. Even when I first watched videos about Little Nightmares without even having played any of the games, I would start panicking during the chase scenes. The animations are programmed so well that there's always a feeling of almost not making it, even if technically you had a lot more time to escape. There are also so many interesting interactions with the janitor that it's hard to pick a favorite. I love how constantly he's pursuing Six, and when he's after the player, you don't really have any room to breathe. I also love how they didn't make him a two-dimensional evil character for the sake of being evil. His name tells us that he's working here, wherever this place is, and the fact that he loves toys and will sometimes wind them up, or will lean into the TV playing some music, shows bits of personality and humanity in this otherwise monstrous being. His character is also creepy because of what it implies about the place we are in. Since this giant deadly creature that wants us dead at any point in the level is just the janitor in this place and plays a small part in this huge machine, what other things will we see later down the line? And what is the line exactly? In one of the first rooms, we see the janitor wrapping what appears to be dead kids into some sheets or bandages and putting them up on hooks that go out of screen. Where are they going? And why is this character taking kids and doing that to them? These are all valid questions that you'll get answers to sooner or later. But what I love most about this chapter is how smoothly it introduces the main enemy and how powerless you feel compared to it. In Little Nightmares, the world around you is so humongous, there is no fighting back. The only way to survive is by hiding or running. There are still boss battles in the game, but Six never really raises an arm. Instead, she uses her surroundings to injure or escape from her enemies. And, sadly to me, the chapter ends with his arms getting cut off. What I love most about this scene is not what it shows you, but what it implies to you. This is the first real boss fight of the game, and the camera locks in on the elevator room thingy we are in for the entire duration of the boss fight. Once the door closes and the arms are cut off, you don't see what happened to the janitor, and in the game you never see him again. But you hear him one last time. The sound design here is amazing. You can hear him screaming, jumping on the floor, stumbling, until the noise gets drowned out by the heavy machinery as you get further and further from the lair. Okay, Now we have to get going, because we are definitely not going back down there. And what better place to go to than the kitchen? I have to be honest, this chapter is one of the weakest in my opinion. The kitchen takes place in a kitchen, oh wow. So now we know where all of the mummified remains went after the janitor wrapped them up and put them on hooks. Before we meet the enemies in this level, Six becomes hungry again. This time she eats a rat. Yeah, this is some great storytelling, people. First it was a piece of bread, then it was meat, and now it's a living thing. I'm glad she stops there and doesn't go any further and just continues eating normally and doesn't... okay. For a game that was meant to be named Hunger, it's pretty ironic that this level takes place in a kitchen, full of food, and some of it isn't even that gross. But it still makes it look unappealing in typical Little Nightmares fashion. My big problem with this level is the main enemy. Enemies. Yeah, there's two. The twin chefs are many people's second favorite enemy in the game, or maybe some people's first. And respectfully, I'd have to disagree. My main issue with them is that they feel like they were given a bit too much room to roam, so they are easily the buggiest and most broken enemies in the first game. Compared to the janitor, the chefs can see and hear just fine, and because the game is a mix of 2D with 3D elements, it's not always clear if they see you or hear you. I swear, sometimes it just has to be bugs, because I would sit in a shadow before one entered the room, and they would still find me and get aggravated. Also, hot take, I feel like they are the least scary out of all of the enemies, not because they are not creepy, but because they are more grotesque than straight up scary. Every time they run after Six, this Looney Tune-ass trombone starts playing, and they screech like pigs. They are very clumsy and often clip in the environment, because I feel like they were giving too much of a free will, which will also sometimes lead to them staying in one position you have to go, or camping your place for way too long, for things to actually stay tense. To prove to you what I mean, in the playthrough I recorded for this video, the chef immediately locked onto me the moment I entered the room. Then he got stuck, so I restarted the level, and then one of the spoons that's meant to be a distraction got no-clipped and constantly made noise. Even when I restarted the level, the chef constantly stood around that area because he heard noise from this place specifically. Also, when I was running in the last chase scene of the level, I landed in a weird position so that the chef that chased me was unusually fast and caught up to me very quickly. I'm not going to mention the other minor bugs that didn't affect the gameplay that much, but if we want to add a retrospective on the game, I feel like I have to mention that it's not all perfect sunshines and rainbows. However, to not only be negative, I do have some positives about the chefs as well. The reveal that there's two of them is one of the smartest choices in the first game. Up until the reveal, you only see one chef at a time, but there are clues, like the double toilet where you can sit with your homies, for example. The design of the characters, with their creepy faces that turn out to be masks, and the amazing layout of the kitchen are great, and it's usual with Little Nightmares, but still to me it pales in comparison to other parts of the game. Everything in the lair of the janitor felt familiar, but twisted and morphed to a grotesque level, while I feel like in the kitchen, the grotesqueness of the world and the characters doesn't really translate that well. I think, and that's just off the top of my head, the imagery of the two beds and the two toilets next to each other are memorable and have that weirdness factor that's so cool with Little Nightmares, so I would enjoy seeing it used more throughout the level. Imagine how fun it would be to see everything in this level be doubled for both of them, even things outside of their bedroom. I'm talking 2 fridges, 2 cooking stations, 2 stoves, 2 doors for every room, like some grotesque crazy stuff that seems familiar but is twisted and crazy in its own unique way. Both the setup and the final chase scene are pretty cool too. It just seems to me like this level has some really great ideas, but is being held by the pretty simple and restrictive gameplay mechanics of the first game. The game works best when it's a bit scripted, so everything is perfectly timed, so you just barely escape these horrendous monsters. So go figure that this chapter's weakest moments are when the chefs free roam and the atmosphere immediately picks up once they are in a pre-planned setup. So yeah, I'm not going to be negative no more. They run after Six and throw some bottles at her, and she just runs to... This chapter is really short. It starts with some strange sounds. Seagulls, maybe? Oh shit, we're on a boat. I won't be the first person to say this, but this is the defining scene of the entire first game. This little section, where the players doesn't do anything but climb up, is not only breathtaking and visually stunning, but it changes the entire narrative of this game. I'd say this is the turning point where things start to become final and actually you feel like you have stakes in this story. Assuming we have never heard about Little Nightmares and just played it for the first time, this is the big reveal of the game. Now it makes sense why in almost every chapter there was a puzzle with things swaying left to right. It explains all of the pipes and why water is so prominent everywhere, and some rooms are leaky and full of water. The fact that from the very first second of gameplay up until this moment the screen constantly swayed a little, just a little, is such an amazing detail that can fly over some people's heads entirely up until this point. Throughout this entire game, we as the player wanted to escape this terrible place full of monsters, and this reveal crushes all hope of that ever happening. We have to get back because there is no outside. The outside is water. You cannot escape this because we are on a boat. Even if this chapter is the smallest one, it ties all of the loose ends and explains some of the imagery in the game. We now have followed the entire routine of this place. Kids are taken into cages, then wrapped up by the janitor to be sent to the kitchen, where they are cooked by the twin chefs just so they can serve them to the guests, who are the main enemy of this chapter. The boat that we were on, which is called the Maw, by the way, is a diner. So we go further into the Maw because we have no other option, and we see the lady from the intro. She has to be important. We saw her portraits throughout the game, and one of the collectibles is a statue of her, but it's the first time we see her in person, looking over the guests. I feel like it's a good time to also mention that the theme of surveillance is also very prominent in this game. The lady looks over the guests. A scrapped character called Wax Bellman, whose only trace in the game is a one-way mirror in the guest bathroom, the janitor looking over the children, and the eye symbols scattered literally everywhere, from doors to children's toys. No matter where you are in the Maw, you are being observed, or there's some kind of a symbol of an eye looking over you. For example, a fun element for theories is the room you can find before Six faces the janitor. In there, there's a couple of cameras for each of the levels, including the lady, whom we'll meet in the next chapter. This means, at least to me, that this whole system is even bigger than the lady who runs this whole place, if even she is being watched and presumably doesn't know it. But let's get on to the level. In the next room, we face the first guest. I love how we are first introduced to them from afar, just to be put in the same room with a non-threatening guest, to then be placed in a false sense of security. The game leads you to think that the guests are too occupied with their plates to kill you, so it's a nice subtle jump scare when one of them sees you and jumps out of their seat at the opportunity to eat you alive. The initial title of the game starts to make more and more sense. Every character in Little Nightmares hungers for something, and is best seen with the guests. They are gluttonous, to a point where they don't care if going after food puts them in an immediate danger. They see Six as a treat that's worth breaking their back or crawling on the floor. What I also love is that the game implies that the food the guests are eating is actually previous guests. We can deduct that after one of the chefs can be seen chopping up something with a meat cleaver and the same place a guest is sleeping on the floor above. This would also make sense why the meat that the guests are eating is so big compared to the children who are being prepared by the janitor. Next, we have this empty room and oh shit, they are after me! This moment in the game is, in my opinion, the most climactic and butt-clenching chase of the first game. The sound design combined with the camera work just raises tension constantly until the relief of Six escaping and one of the guests pummeling down to their death. And before the chapter ends, Six is hungry again. And this time, yeah, she eats a gnome. It's a gut-wrenching scene that thankfully doesn't have any even sadder backstory behind it, but it's still one of the most memorable moments from the first game. Since the beginning, Six felt like a victim, and up until this point all of the secret gnome rooms were safe spaces for Six. The only interactions with the gnomes we could do is hug them, so this comes as a surprise and a sign that we might not be playing as the good guy in this story. The gnome offering her a sausage also implies that the hunger is getting more and more severe, so that she has to start eating bigger and bigger things in order to satiate it. I wouldn't call this part of the game really a standalone chapter. The only thing standing between us and the end credits is the boss fight with the lady, which is the only real thing in this level. By this point we have seen the lady humming her lullaby a couple of times in the game, but it's the closest we have been to her up until now. Six is literally walking through her quarters, and they reveal a couple of things about her that are really interesting in my opinion. Mainly, the mirrors. Throughout the game, we have seen a couple, but anywhere where the lady might potentially see them, they are broken. The lady surrounds herself with disgusting guests, whom she observes in the distance, and her own quarters are filled with mannequins that resemble her, but the thing that would reflect her perfectly without any distortion is always broken. She also wears a mask. Something about her, as with everything in Little Nightmares, is off. It is clear by the way that she is positioned in the story and in the places we see her that she plays a crucial part in the story of Little Nightmares 1. But without the knowledge from the DLC, we don't really get a clear explanation on why the lady is so important in the Maw. From how she's presented, we can deduct that she is the one running this place. She's the character that's the first image of the game. She's the thing that haunts Six, so there must be some connection. One thing that I really enjoy and find poetic is the way to defeat her, which is by showing her herself, her own reflection, using the only not broken mirror in the entire level. The fight itself is not that hard and is much more symbolic and metaphorical rather than actually challenging, but that's just Little Nightmares for you. One thing I don't see people praise enough, in my opinion, is how the game tricks you with how you'll face the lady. We all know that the boss fight is coming, but it's never clear how it will happen. At the end of the previous chapter, it's almost like she'll turn around in the elevator and see you. Then Six runs up next to her, so it seems like it'll be a hide-and-seek section, like it was with the janitor, where you cannot alert her using sound or she'll turn around and kill you. But then, in the same level, you have to retrieve a key that will evidently make some sound, which will alert her and maybe bring her to you, which also parallels the puzzle with the chefs, which worked the same way. But to the player's surprise, the lady disappears. She's unpredictable. So you run to the door with the lock, to then be jump-scared by her and get into a chase with her, like we did earlier with the guest. But that's another red herring. In a matter of a couple of minutes, the game tricks your subconsciousness into thinking the final boss fight will happen right now, and it will be like something you've already done previously in the game. Maybe you'll have to be careful with the sounds you're making, like you did with the janitor, or maybe you'll have to hide around the corners like you did with the chefs, or maybe it will be a chase scene like you did with the guests. All of that captured in a minute or two of actual gameplay. So then the actual boss fight happens. Once the lady is defeated, Six becomes hungry again and eats one last time. And then she turns around and looks at the player, like we didn't just help her escape from prison or something. This leads us to the final scene of the game. There is no platforming, there is no puzzle, or an enemy to fear. Six becomes the most powerful being in the maw, and casually eats the souls of the guests who try to eat her. This is definitely one of the coolest moments in the franchise, and showcases a turn in the character of Six, from being hunted to being the hunter. If throughout the game you have hugged the gnomes, all of them will walk in frame just before the credits roll, and the game is officially over. After the credits, there's one additional look at the maw as an island, almost fully submerged under the water, and then it's back to the main menu. And with all of that being said, that will be the main game done. Finished. Before I go into the summary of why I love this game, it's clearly trying to tell a story. So let me tell you what I think it's about. Obviously, there are a million and one other theories, and mine will almost certainly be wrong, especially because I won't be considering the other games in the franchise. But yeah, let me up a little. There are many ways to interpret this story, because the elements are all here, but the lack of dialogue or cutscenes leaves a lot to interpretation. I think the key to understanding this game is its previous title, Hunger. Little Nightmares is all about hunger. The main character Six becomes hungry regularly and has to eat more and more grotesque things to survive. On the surface level, she's just hungry. But the fact that she lands in a kitchen with so much food, yet decides to start eating living things, tells me it's a bit more metaphorical. I think the protagonist is meant to represent the hunger for power, and how the goalpost is always out of reach, so you're never fully satisfied. She has to continue eating more and more, because she will never be full again. The theme of hunger continues with the chefs, preparing a stupid amount of food to satiate the gluttonous guests, who are also never full. I think the metaphor with them is a bit more on the nose. They are literally eating themselves to death, and will devour anything that's remotely edible, even if it means that they'll die from it. The lady is also hungry, not for food, but for beauty. She isn't the only character wearing a mask, but is the only character truly terrified of her own appearance. Every mirror around her has to be broken, and every creature she surrounds herself with has to be horrendous. Even when she's not perfecting her beauty in a broken mirror, she watches over the guests from a higher ground. She is always separated from the rest. This leads me to one of the themes of the game being hierarchy, and that would also be one of the lenses I theorized through. Everything around Six is so big and scary because she's a child. She's on the bottom of the pyramid. She's small and helpless in a world not built for her. On the bottom, there are also gnomes who are the closest to us and are the only creatures that we encounter that don't try to kill us. There are also other kids and leeches, all at the bottom of this food chain, being literal food. If you think about it, even without the knowledge from the DLC, the maw would not function without the hard work of gnomes and the sacrifice of the children. There's many of them, and they are essential to the story. Then going up, we have the janitor and the chefs. They are obviously much bigger and more dangerous, but they also have their own places in the maw. The janitor has his bed and all, and the chefs even got their own toilets. Compared to the gnomes and the runaway children who live in the cracks, the vents, and between the walls or under the floors, it's clear that the maw was designed for the janitor and the chefs to be there. In the bigger picture, however, without us looking at them as children seeing huge monsters, they're just service workers. The janitor and the chefs are just doing their jobs and servicing the guests. They live in terrible condition and are clearly hurting as well. All of these characters grunt, breathe heavily, and are severely disfigured. Next up are the guests, who dress up a little bit more and are guided through the halls that are decorated and clean compared to the rest of the mall we saw throughout the game. Essentially, they are the customers who went to eat at a fancy restaurant, and they are the fueling force needed for the mall to function. What they do is disgusting, and it's their selfishness, gluttony, and incompetence that makes them terrible. But they are also the reason why the mall even exists. It's to service them. But above all, on top of the pyramid stands the lady, who in my theory is a metaphor for the elites. While the guests might think they live in luxury and are on top of the world, far away from it, mostly hidden, lays a person who watches over them all and is much more powerful than any one of them or some of them combined. She has her own quarters, she has her powers, she runs this whole ship. She is the boss of all of the other characters. From what we see in the game, she doesn't do a single thing compared to chefs or the janitor, but I think that's by design. My theory is that the mall is meant to be a smaller version of our own world. The poor, disfigured, and the children are the workforce who run this world, only to be paid the dust and to have to service the elites who are gluttonous and never satisfied with what they get. From afar, the quiet 1% reaps all of the benefits from this unfair system, while every single other being on this ladder is struggling to survive. Now, this is just one of my theories, and I bet that it doesn't even make sense with the stuff that we got in the second and the third game, and all of the DLC and the side stories. But I could also go for a route of this being a dream, or the imaginings of a child, which would also make sense and I would also agree with. This game could also be a metaphor for addiction, but these theories are all something I already saw somewhere, so that's my one take and I hope you like it. Now let's get on to the summary. I hope this comes across in the way I talk about this game. I think it's incredible. I won't blindly say that it doesn't have flaws, because there are parts of this that didn't even age poorly, more so were not that polished from the beginning. Little Nightmares 1 is a small game with big ambition, and I think it does everything it's said to do pretty amazingly. It was never about the difficult puzzles or tricky platformer sections. The game is one big story told through many small sets. It tells a story within a story. And it's also just breathtakingly beautiful. I can take basically any part of the game and it looks like a painting or something worthy to be a wallpaper, and that's where this game truly shines. It's fascinating how everything you see as the player guides you through this world and builds upon it. It's so subtle, but I enjoy that we, as Six, unknowingly follow the routine of them all, first going through the janitor, then the chefs, then the guests, and finish on the lady. I love how all of these characters, maybe apart from the guests, were giving some other traits and quirks that make these monsters seem more human. The janitor loves toys, the chefs go outside and smoke, and the lady is obsessed with her beauty, and later in the DLC we learn that she's also obsessed with dolls. I envy those who got to experience this world for the first time, because damn does it go hard. Both the chase scenes and the hide and seek sections were anxiety inducing when I first watched them, and were even better when I first played them myself. You know, in these times of non-stop AI slop, it's nice to consume an actual piece of media and art made by humans with intention. What makes Little Nightmares maybe not unique, but special, is that you can tell from every room and every character that somebody had put some effort, thought, and love into making it part of a bigger world, a bigger project, and that all the people who worked on this had the same idea about what game they were making, and they executed it pretty flawlessly. There are some things that could be improved upon, or maybe expanded upon, but that's a better topic for a DLC. Or maybe a sequel. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Thank you for watching.